could be said that through story we're looking at the nature of illusion. And there is that story about the man called Joseph, and he was a noble and a very learned scholar. But when his country was invaded, he was enslaved and taken and put in the lowly service of serving food to the prisoners who had been incarcerated in jail. Now there was an occasion when Joseph was taking the morning water and the stale bread down to the prisoners, two of whom, one being the king's baker, who had inadvertently baked a stone in the bread that had been given to him and broken his tooth, and the second was the king's barber, who had nicked the king's face when he was being shaved. Now when Joseph came down to give the water and the bread to these two prisoners, both of them said that that night they had had a dream, but neither of them knew of anyone who could interpret their dreams. And they voiced this to Joseph. And Joseph said, "Tell me your dream. Perhaps with God's help I will be able to interpret them for you." But the two prisoners laughed at him. "Look at you, a slave. What would you know? Look at you." And then Joseph was not at all affronted by this, but he said to the two men, "Do you know of the great physician Kimtas?" And of course both of them said and laughed, "Of course we know of the great physician Kimtas. He's known throughout all the lands." And Joseph said, "Let me tell you a story of the physician Kimtas. There was an occasion when he set out on the road to learn more of the world and life, taking with him all his vials and his ointments and his implements to serve people along the way. But it so happened that after a long day of walking, Physician Kimtas was very exhausted and lay down under a tree and went into a deep, deep sleep. And whilst he was asleep, a man came by who was obviously of the lowest kind, dressed in rags, straw sandals on his feet. But when he saw this richly robed being lying on the side of the road, he took the opportunity to strip himself of his ragged garments, undress the physician Kimtas, and put on his clothes. And off he went, so that when physician Kimtas woke up, he found himself completely naked. All that there was a pile of rags lying beside him, which of course he had no choice but to put them on to cover his nakedness. But then he arrived in town, but as he was entering the township, he happened to hear wailing, cries of lament going on. So he dared to go to the house from which the sounds were emanating, and when he went in, he saw that there were several physicians leaning over the small body of a boy who was lying on the bed there, obviously very close to death, and the parents were lamenting. So physician Kimtas went over to the bedside of the boy, and he said to the parents, "I know what it is that is the matter with your son. I can help you." But the father, seeing this being in rags, said, "Get out of here. What are you doing in here? How can you be of us? How can you help us with our son? Look at you. You're nothing but a beggar. Get out." Now the wife berated the husband. "Perhaps you should not have treated this man so harshly," but the husband said, "Look at him. How can he be a physician? How can he help? He's just a ragged beggar coming in to beg." So he was sent off. So physician Kimtas went into town, and he began to say to the people, "Come, come, I'm a physician. I can help you." But they too saw his rags and laughed at him. But there was one man covered in sores, and he came over to the physician, who had by then laid out his implements and his vials and his ointments. And physician Kimtas immediately took out ointment, and when it was placed on the horrible ulcers of the man, he was healed. And this was witnessed by all those who stood around. And of course, they realized and began to seek the advice and healing of this great physician. Now it wasn't long before the word had gotten all around town of the presence of this great doctor, people coming from near and far. But it so happened that the father of the boy who the physician had stood by his bedside came to Kimtas weeping and apologizing, saying, "I am so sorry. If I had not judged by appearances, my son would still be alive today." So in this story, Joseph was able to let these two prisoners know, "I am not what I appear to be." And so, hearing this story, both of them relayed their dreams to him, and Joseph was able accurately to tell one, "Yes, in 3 days you will be released. This is what your dream is saying." And to the second he said, "In 3 days your head will be lopped from your shoulders." And so it was that this indeed came to pass, as was interpreted by the scholar Joseph. So this story is very clear in what it tells us. Firstly, perhaps, do not judge by appearances. And more deeply, perhaps we can glean that it's telling us nothing is what it seems. So as we seek to explore the nature of illusion, there's no doubt that each of us have stories. And if you don't mind, I'll relate my own personal story as to how I learned not to judge by appearances. I had not yet learned that nothing is what it seems. But at about the age of 14, in that time when every woman who came into our house was called auntie, one of those aunties came to our house, and immediately on seeing her, being this 14 or 15-year-old girl, I judged her as dowdy and ignorant, wearing one of those floral dresses that are now coming back into vogue. I judged her as ignorant and dowdy. But then she took out a tablecloth that she had embroidered, and when she spread it out, it was perfect. On the front and on the back, the delicate colors and the perfection of the embroidery. Not a stitch, not a thread out of place. And I was humbled, and I vowed that from that time on, I would not judge by appearances. But the lesson, the awareness, the realization that nothing is as it seems, took much, much longer to learn. But what's your story? We have all stories that can give us confirmation in one way or another of illusion, delusion. What's your story? What's your recollection?